Today I'll be recording from land stolen from the Noongar Whadjuk people. I wish to acknowledge the strength of their continuing culture and offer my respects to their elders, both past and present. Hello! So today we're going to be doing just a quick teaching lesson. I didn't expect to be doing these, but a lot of people are finding themselves in the position currently where they have to run professional development, or they are high school teachers but have never really done any online teaching before. I'm just going to do a quick tutorial on how to do those things. So our learning intention today is students will be able to teach a thing online. All right, so you got to get your structure right. So you need to have a learning intention. I use SWBAT, which is students will be able to. Lots of different people use different things. The teachers among you will know what this means. Essentially, you need to have an intention for your class. You need to know what you want your students to be able to make, say, do, write, whatever. By the end of your class, every student in that room or every student in that virtual room will be able to do whatever it is that is in your learning intention. If you're running a professional development and you want your staff to be able to engage with clients via Zoom, then make your learning intention something like students will be able to place a call or have a meeting on Zoom that is productive, something like that. Check-ins and question times. So I'm recording this right now and not streaming it. Usually I'd be streaming these things and I'd have periods of time, points in the lesson where I stop and I make sure that everyone's caught up and understands what we've covered so far. I will have one in this lesson in order to demonstrate this. YouTube's a bit different though, because people can pause a YouTube video and go back and rewatch stuff and make sure that they understand. But when you're streaming or when you're in a Zoom meeting or something like that, you need to make sure that you're stopping, because it's easy to forget when you're in this medium rather than in a classroom, because no one's putting their hand up and yelling, "I don't understand that." So make sure you stop and allow people time to think and ask questions and all the rest of it. Pick a format and stick to it. So you'll notice that this lesson is very similarly formatted to other lessons that I've done, so the two English lessons that I've done so far on this channel. Make sure that you stick to your format so that people can sort of acquire an understanding of how your lessons run and then know what to expect and when they can stop and think and when they can ask questions and all the rest of it. Respond to feedback. So stick to your format, but if people give you feedback on that format and say, this isn't working for me, this isn't working for me, you have to make a decision about that feedback and go, well, is that just for that learner, or is everyone experiencing this issue with my format or the way that I teach or whatever, and respond to it. So say, thank you for that feedback. Actually talk to the person who gave you that feedback. So thank you for that feedback. I'll, have a think about it and maybe I'll try something else that will work for you better. Yeah. Okay, this is really the meat of the lesson here. So we're going to get on to how to do this more specifically. But to start with, you really need to think about, it's less of a sweet spot really, but the 15-minute ceiling. So when you're planning your lessons, your professional development, whatever it is that you're doing via video, Skype, whatever, you really need to think about the 15-minute sweet spot or ceiling, because a lot of learners are very good at online learning. A lot of learners are very good at Zoom meetings. A lot of learners are very good at whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of people aren't. I'm one of those people. I can create these lessons and teach people via this medium. I'm terrible at learning on this medium. Anything that goes above 15 minutes, I'm out. I'm tuned out. And that is the case for a lot of people. A lot of people, it's less than 15 minutes, but this is kind of like the average, right? So you really want to keep things at a maximum of 15 minutes. I've got a video online right now. It's a punctuation lesson that goes for 25 minutes, and that is a sore spot for me. I feel like I have to go back and re-record that so that or re-edit it so that it is less than 15 minutes, because I know that people are tuning out past 15 minutes. You really need to keep it down to 15 minutes. And to that end, let's move on. So backwards planning and developmental planning and assessment. These two things go hand in hand. Basically, backwards planning means you want to think about where you want your students to be at the end of whatever course that you're doing, right? So this isn't the end of the lesson necessarily, but the end of the course. So if I'm doing a course, an online course, for example, on how to write essays, English essays, or expository writing on a text. So say I've got kids reading, I don't know, Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Not that I'd get kids to read that, but, you know, any kind of book, and I want them to write an essay on it at the end and send it to me, then I need to think about what I want that essay to look like at the end of my course, and then plan lessons backwards from there so that each lesson is one piece of that final product that I want them to submit. That's where we get onto developmental planning and assessment. I'm going to do a more full lesson on this in the future, I think, particularly for teachers. This is kind of my bread and butter. It's not something that I've come up with. It's Hattie. I've just been out of the game too long. Hattie came up with this theory, but basically it's how I teach. This is kind of what my planning looks like. So, first of all, you need to break down whatever it is that you're teaching in terms of skills and knowledge. I am focusing on expository writing and writing an essay. So, just for this anyway. So, I've broken that down into skills and knowledge. Skills that I need people to have to write a expository essay on whatever text that we're reading are... they need to have a grasp on sentence structure. They need to have a grasp on punctuation. These are separate, discrete skills. One requires the other, kind of, a little bit. In order to be good at punctuation, you need to be good at sentence structure, but they are different things. And so I've done a lesson on each of these things. Spelling and vocab, discrete skill as well. I put them together, spelling and vocab, because really when you're learning vocab, you learn how to spell the words that you learn, right? I probably won't do a lesson on this. I will probably guide students individually on how to improve their vocab based on where they're at with their vocab. But I don't think that I would do a YouTube lesson on spelling and vocab. And so that's something that while planning, I go, that doesn't really fit with the medium. And we'll get to using the medium later. Structure. What I mean by structure here, it's probably badly labeled. I mean essay structure. So learning how to plan and write an essay. Probably something I will do a video on. Then you've got, so these are all skills. These are all things that you actually have to learn how to do on the page, right? Knowledge is completely different. You can have all the skill with writing that you want, but not read the book and not know any of these things, okay? And flipping that around, you can read the book and have an incredible knowledge of all of these things, but not know how to write an essay about it. So that's where you get the breakdown. So knowledge, when you're reading a text, you need to have knowledge of the characters, you need to have knowledge of the setting, you need to have knowledge of the themes, cross-textual references and theories. There's probably more to add to these lists. In fact, there definitely are, but that's not the point right now. The point is, I've broken these things down, and I know that each of these separate things are things that I'm going to have to teach lessons on. Probably multiple lessons on for things like characters, setting, and themes, right? And cross-textual references and theories. If I'm getting kids to use, or sorry, I shouldn't say kids. If I'm getting students to use a feminist theory to critique Macbeth, then that's probably something I'm going to have to spend a whole, if not multiple lessons on, particularly when I've only got 15-minute segments to teach them feminist theories and feminist critiques of Macbeth. So, then you have to break these things down further. So, you've got sentence structure. In my sentence structure video, I went over simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and then I briefly spoke on how good writing means varying those. How good writing means basically not relying on, look, I can do complex sentences, so I'm just going to do complex sentences. You have to actually vary those things and use simple and compound sentences so that you get something more, so that you build a rhythm in your writing. If I were to assess students on sentence structure, I am not going to say you have demonstrated satisfactory sentence structure. That is completely useless to a student. That kind of feedback doesn't help a student at all. What does help a student is saying your simple sentences are fine, your compound sentences are fine, your complex sentences, they're okay, they need work, but they're okay. What you're not doing is varying your sentences. What I'm seeing is blocks of compound sentences, blocks of simple sentences, a couple complex sentences, but you're not interchanging them to build a rhythm, right? That is much more adequate feedback that a student can actually use. Likewise, punctuation. Sentence enders, full stops, exclamation marks, question marks. That would be my bottom tier of punctuation assessment. Then I'd go up to apostrophes if a student is using the correct the apostrophe in the correct location of there, for example, or don't. Commas. Probably a bit more difficult than apostrophes, right? Commas are actually quite complex, as we learned in the punctuation lesson that I've done. That would be my next level up. There would actually be a huge jump between apostrophes and commas, I would argue. And so you could argue that really I should put a couple of spaces, empty spaces in here before I put commas in, so that it shows a student, look, if I'm working on simple and compound sentences, really after that I need to have a grasp on commas in order to get complex sentences properly. So I need to, I suppose you'd have the space in here. So you have, let me just do it. Be right back. So here I've got my edited rubric, if you want to call it that. So here what I've done is I put in spaces into the rubric to demonstrate a sort of a gap in how difficult something is compared to other things next to it. So here I've got punctuation, I've got commas. Once you've learnt commas, there's actually quite a big gap between knowing how to use a comma and a semicolon. So that has been introduced there, right? I've also got a gap here with complex sentences. Around the same time you learn semicolons, you can probably have a pretty solid grasp on complex sentences. However, complex sentences also need you to really know commas before you can really do complex sentences, right? So I've got those gaps here. Now, teachers can sit there, English teachers can sit there and argue about when these things need to be placed in the rubric, right? And how many gaps should be in between each thing, but we need to move on. So you can have those arguments with your faculty and chat about it yourselves. Afterwards, we've got the characters and my character list here. Names, the obstacle that a character faces, their intention, the character's intention, or what motivates them, character motivation, and then thematic purpose. We'll get into that later with another lesson, an English lesson on these, but that would be how I would break down characters, or that's how I'm thinking about breaking down characters for my lesson on these things. Now, this is what I meant when I said check in and make sure you give people a chance to stop and think about what you've taught them so far and ask questions. So I'm encouraging you now to stop, pause the video, think about some questions. You can ping me on Twitter or just in the comments of this video would be fine. Hopefully you've done that now and we can move on. So the next thing is using the medium, right? So you are a teacher online now. You need to make sure that you are using that. Don't just run your classroom like you would a in-person class, right? Or even if you're doing professional development or anything like that, you need to make sure that you're using your medium. So you'll notice that I had a meme here. Make sure that you are using the visual medium. Make sure that you are including memes. You might not like them, but they are, whether you like it or not, they are the primary communication method of the internet at the moment. So make sure you're making use of them. Visual dynamics. You'll notice that my slides aren't just black and white. They have a little theme added to them. It's not much. It's very simple stuff, but it is effective at keeping people visually engaged. Discussion. You have a comment section. You have Twitter. You have social media. Engage your students in those things. They are using them anyway. Now, if you're a high school teacher, it's probably not appropriate for you to slide into your, students' DMs or anything. It's not appropriate for your students to slide into yours on Facebook. However, have a professional Twitter. Talk to your students via, your professional Twitter. Talk to your students via the YouTube comments if you're recording, YouTube lessons. Make sure that you're engaging in discussion, because really, this is the whole point of the internet. And if you're a principal and you're watching this and you're forbidding your teachers from, engaging in comments and discussions or social media at all with your students, you're doing it wrong. Basically, get a grip. This is 2020 and you really need to be engaging in this stuff because it's where your students live. Sometimes the mountain needs to come to Muhammad. All right, don'ts. This is where we'll wrap up. Do not ever do anything for the sake of doing it. Okay? So I just talked about using the discussion. Don't force your kids to engage in discussion. Don't be like, I need 2 posts on my comments section. Otherwise you fail or whatever. That is pointless. If students have a question, they will ask it. Allow them to ask it and respond to it. Do not force them to ask questions or anything like that. It's ridiculous. Don't engage in busy work. Just because your students are in isolation, that does not mean that they need to be completing crossword puzzles. That doesn't help them. Likewise for professional development. If you're a manager or whatever, company director, and you're getting your staff to engage in professional development just because they're at home and you're paying them, that's ridiculous. Make it actually meaningful. It's a good idea to engage in professional development during this time. But also, people are trying their hardest and they're dealing with a lot right now. Don't make them engage in busy work or things that would just waste their time. Okay, now checking in with our learning intention again. Your learning intention is students will be able to teach a thing online. I trust that you know how to develop a PowerPoint slide. I trust that you know that you can look at other videos for how to record a video like this. This is the pedagogy of the whole thing. Making sure that you know the do's and don'ts of how to plan a lesson and carry it out. So hopefully this was helpful. More videos to come. Like, comment, subscribe, all those things. And I'll see you later. Cheers.